Hi everyone, welcome to our 13th lecture of CSC 110. And in this lecture, we're going to be studying relational databases. Okay, before I jump in and start talking about databases themselves, let me just remind you about productivity software. All right, so most of you have the home version of Microsoft Office, or maybe you went ahead and downloaded LibreOffice. And to remind you, what you get with that is you get like a series of programs that all work together. Okay, probably the most useful one is your word processing program, and like Microsoft Word. All right, when I taught you that a couple of lectures ago, I actually used LibreOffice Writer, but they're all more or less the same. Okay, they all work the same, and they all have the same kind of function within productivity office software. Okay, another important part of office software are spreadsheets. Okay, and we studied that last time. I used LibreOffice. Okay, it's called LibreOffice Calc, but if you have the Microsoft Office suite, then you have Excel, and again, they all work more or less the same. So everything that I taught you with LibreOffice Calc will also work with Excel. Okay, and then they have other programs, like they have presentation software. This is for like slideshows, but I'm not going to teach you that. They're really easy. This presentation software is really easy to use, and so you'll be able to figure that out on your own. And then if you have the business edition of Microsoft Office, you're going to get a databasing program called Access. Okay, now you probably have the home edition, so you probably don't have Access. If you download the LibreOffice suite, you will get the equivalent of that in LibreOffice called LibreOffice Base, and that's what I'm going to be using in this program in this lecture to teach you. Okay, now they're all, again, more or less the same. Like where the buttons are might be slightly different, but they all more or less work the same. Okay, and the databasing program is by far the most important part of the entire suite, because it kind of joins them all together. Okay, now you might say, well, no, I think the word processor is the most important part because that's what I use. Yeah, I know, but if you were actually running an entire office, you would discover that the databasing program is the most important one, and the reason is that that's where all the information about the company is. Okay, and so like things like who your customers are, what products you run, or if you're like a doctor's office, your patients, or a college, your students, courses that are taught, and so on. All that information gets put into a database, and then all these other programs, like your word processing program, actually go into the database, and they get the data out of that. Okay, and it really speeds up these databasing programs. Really speed up Office processes. Okay, and so I should tell you about this idea of scalability in information technology. The idea behind scalability is a question of it's asking, like, how much work does a particular task take? Okay, and it's not so much how much work the task takes, but how much extra work does the task take as you increase the number of data items that you have to consider or process as part of this task. Okay, so let me be more specific. Suppose that you wanted to type out a whole bunch of letters to all your customers, or if you're Duval College, to all your students. Okay, so you want to type out all these letters, and you ask yourself your question: how much work does this take? Well, if you have to write out every single individual letter for every student, then it's the number of students that you have. So if you've got 100 students, you're going to have to write 100 letters. If you've got 200 students, then you would have to write out 200 letters. Okay, so scalability asks that kind of question. And more than that, if you double the number of students, how much extra work do you have to do? Okay, now different tasks scale differently. Okay, so to continue in this example with writing letters to all the students at a college, if you had to type out each letter manually, then that's what's known as an order n operation. Okay, so if I ask the question, how much work does it take to type out all the letters to all the students at the college, if you typed out each one individually, you would answer that that's an order n operation. In other words, it takes as many steps as there are students. Okay, or a better way to think about it is, if you double the number of students, the way I have it written here, if you double the number of students that you have to write letters to, you're going to double the amount of work. Okay, so 200 students, you're going to have to send out 200 letters. Double that to 400 students, you're going to have to send out 400 letters. Okay, so double the amount of students, double the amount of work. That's what I mean by a data item. Okay, so a data item is like a student. and you have to process this data item. In other words, you have to do some task for that particular student. So number of students, that's the number of actual letters that you have to write out. This is what's known as an order n operation. Okay, so that sounds like kind of a funny name, but that's what we call it in the business. Okay, now not all tasks are order n. Most people would say, oh, that makes sense. Twice as many students, twice as much work. Okay, but some tasks actually turn out to be order n squared. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, what happens with an order n squared task is if you double the number of data items, you're actually going to quadruple the amount of work you do. And you go, wait, that doesn't make sense. Why would it go that way? Well, you can imagine a situation where a secretary has to go to one file cabinet, look up one file, and then open up that file and then cross-reference it with another file from another file cabinet, okay? And so they have to go to like two different file cabinets doing two searches. And so for every student, there's like, it's actually like it goes as the square of the number of students that there are. Okay, so you actually would double the number of data items. You could actually quadruple the amount of work that you have to do. All right, because you have to keep doing this cross-referencing. Okay, and so you can imagine if you've got 100 students, you have to go through 100 files to find the student. Okay, but then once you find the student, there might be another file cabinet for courses, and then you would have to go through say 200 courses just to kind of cross-match the student and which courses they take. And so there are some tasks which are much more complicated than just order n, and these are like order n squared tasks. Okay, so again, order n, if you double the number of data items, you double the amount of work. Order n squared, you double the number of items, you quadruple the amount of work that you have to do. And you say, what's quadruple? Because that's 2 to the exponent 2. Okay, 2 times 2 is 4, and that's why it's quadrupled. All right, and so there are some tasks like that. Now, I don't expect you to analyze. I'm not going to throw a task at you and say, is this an order n task or an order n squared task? I'm just telling you that there are some tasks that you need to do in an office which are order n, and there are some tasks which are order n squared. Okay. And again, the order n squared usually have to do with cross-referencing between different file cabinets and so on, if you're using the old filing system. Okay, now that's all gone away with computers, of course, but that's kind of the point of the databases. They're kind of like your electronic file cabinets. And then, remarkably, there are order 1 tasks. Okay, and what an order 1 task is, this may seem counterintuitive, but basically the amount of work it takes doesn't depend on the number of items. Okay, so if you needed to write a letter to all the students, but you don't have to retype the whole letter, it's going to be the same letter, the absolutely identical letter to every single student, so you don't have to retype it. Well, then you just have to type it once, and you only have to type it once if it's for 1 student, for 100 students, for 1,000 students. So these are jobs or tasks which don't increase as the number of data items increase. Okay, so again, you have like 100 students and it takes maybe 5 minutes to type out this letter. You have 200 students, it still takes 5 minutes to type out the task. Okay, you have 1,000 students, you still have to type out the letter only once, 5 minutes. Okay, so the amount of work doesn't increase or decrease depending on the number of data items that you have. All right, and databases help you to reduce some of these other higher order tasks down to an order 1 task. Okay, you say, well, how does it do that? All right, so basically, and I'll show you this towards the end of the lecture, basically what you do is, suppose you want to send out a personalized letter to all the students at a college. And so you're going to say, not just dear student, okay, which is a generic, you're going to say dear, and then you're going to put a first name and a last name in the letter. Okay, and it's going to be an individualized letter for each student. Okay, all you have to do is type out the letter just once as a template. And so you write the letter out, and then wherever you want the first name put, you don't actually type in the first name of each student, because then you'd have to go through every student. You just type in this field which says this is where you put the first name, and then you type in another field which says this is where you put in the last name. And you create not an actual Word document, but you create a Word template. And the template has these fields, and the fields are going to be filled in with the data that comes out of the database. Okay, so even a personalized letter, which normally would be an order n operation, because you'd have to type out a personalized letter to every single student out there. So even a personalized letter like that can be reduced to an order 1 operation. And the reason it can be reduced is because you're just going to use these fields, and then you're going to tell the computer, okay, I wrote the template, now you fill in the fields. And if there's 100 students, it'll reproduce the same template 100 times individualized for each one of the students. And you say, well, where's it getting the data for each of the students? It's getting that out of the database. Okay, and so you could see that these databases have really sped up the way things work in an office. All right, now like you don't have to actually create the databases. And in fact, in this lecture, I am going to show you how a database is designed, but I'm not going to expect you to design a database. I mean, their database design courses are like entire semester long, and it's way beyond the scope of this course for me to teach you how a database is designed. I am going to do one for you, though. I'm going to design it, and the reason I'm going to design it is not in the expectation that you have to design it, but just so you know what's going on inside a database. And this will help you to make use of databases even better into the future, okay? And you might say, well, when will I ever have to use a database? And maybe you're going to go into like the medical field, okay? Well, even in the medical field, everything now is databases, okay? So, all kind of medical records are done with databases. They may not even call them that. They may just call them medical record systems or something like that. And you don't know if that's all you knew, that it was just a medical record system. You might not know that behind the scenes, everything that I'm going to be teaching you in this lecture is what's going on. And the better you understand the machinery of databases, the better you're going to be able to make use of that database. Even if you don't design the database, you're going to be able to use the database better, understanding some of the principles that go behind designing databases, okay? So yes, I am going to design a database for you. It's going to be a database for a college. I'm going to show you how it works. You'll probably say as you go along, I would never have known to do that. And that's right, that's because I'm not expecting you to be able to design it from scratch, but at least you'll see how they work behind the scenes, and you'll have a very good understanding of how to make use of them, okay? So there you go. This is the story behind databases, okay? And I gave a couple of examples here of the kinds of things that would be order n operations and order n squared. So like back in the 1950s, where we didn't really have computers, and secretaries just had to type out letters. Well, if you have to send out 100 letters, then that's 100 letters worth of work. You have to send out 200 letters. That's twice as much work, okay? But you might have these weird situations where you might have a situation like you want to send out letters only to certain students who took only certain courses only during certain years, okay? Well, then you might have to go between two file cabinets, the student file cabinet, or the secretary would have to go between the student file cabinet and the course file cabinet, and they'd have to cross-reference it, and then that would suddenly become an order n squared operation, okay? And so this could become a lot of work to do this. You go into an office, a secretary's office, and say, can you find me all the students that took CSC 110 between 2005 and 2010, something like that. And they go crazy running back and forth between the various file cabinets trying to cross-reference them. It would probably be an order n squared operation, okay? Databases make all of that much, much faster, all right? Here's another example. Those phone books, those big, thick phone books, I guess they still give them out, but, they throw them on your porches or whatever. But no one uses phone books anymore because you just look up names and numbers online or in your contact list of your phone. But, once upon a time, there were these phone books, and they were alphabetically ordered by last name. So it was easy if you knew someone's last name to find the phone number for that person, because the last name is alphabetical, and you just search through the phone book, which is a kind of a database, and you just search alphabetically. And it's easy because alphabetical, like if you're too far ahead, that you have to go earlier. Now if the letter's like you're looking up the letter D, a last name that starts with D, and you open the phone book and you've opened it up to where the letter M is, well, you know that it has to be before M, and so you just keep narrowing it down that way, okay? So that's actually an ordered log n operation, which I didn't even teach you about, okay? It's a different order. But, that's pretty fast, looking up things by last name. But imagine if I gave you that same phone book and said, here's a phone number, find the name for it. That's an order n operation, because the phone numbers are not in alphabetical order. So you'd have to go through the phone book one number at a time and go, does it match, does it match, does it match? And you can't make use of the fact that it's in alphabetical order to narrow it down. And so you'd be in a world of pain trying to find out the last name that corresponds to the phone number if I give you the phone number. Conversely, if I give you the last name, it's easy to find the phone number, but if I give you the phone number, it's not so easy to find the last name, okay? And so, these operations, the order of these operations tells you something about how much work they are. And the general name for all of that is called scalability. So when you're asking for scalability, you're asking for how much extra work does it take if I increase the number of data items. Okay, and order n is basically you double the number of data items, you double the amount of work. Order n squared means you double the number of data items, you quadruple the amount of work. Okay, and order 1 is your best situation. You increase the number of data items and it makes no difference. It's just a set amount of work no matter how many data items you have to do. Okay, so databases help you to do all of these tasks very, very quickly. Okay, so now that you've got this kind of background and this understanding of what the database, what the purpose of the database is, let's actually design one. Okay, and again, the purpose of this is not so that you can design it, but just so you have an understanding of how databases work behind the scenes, so you could use them better in the future. And believe me, you will be using databases even if you don't know that you're using databases. Okay, all right. So the first thing is we're going to be studying relational databases. Okay, and so you say, well, what's this word relational mean? Is there a non-relational database? And the answer is yes, you can have non-relational databases. And what you could try to do, if you were naive about this, you could try to put all the information of your organization in one table. Okay, and if you try to do that, it turns out to not work out so well. Okay, and that's, I'm going to show you why. So let's say that we want to just basically record every student and the courses they take. Okay, so you've got this table that you could see right here. All right, and this table basically you have like you have here this upper row here, which is the column headers. Okay, and so you've got like an ID number which basically identifies a student, and there's the student. It's actually the student name. Okay, and I didn't bother with the first or last name. And then there's class 1, which is the class that the student takes, or one of the classes the student takes. And there's class 2, and there's class 3, and there's class 4. And now there's only 4 classes here, but if the student took more classes, we could create more columns like that. Okay, so this is a database. It's not a relational database. Okay, and that's because it's just one table. A relational database is made up of many tables which are related to one another. Okay, so if you have just one table, you're automatically not a relational database. Okay, now this is sort of like your phone book situation that I gave you a minute ago. If I asked you what courses is Jim taking, you would just go here and you would find, oh, Jim is number 1, student number 1, and you go across there. Whoops, you go across there and you go, okay, so Jim is taking CSC 110, Jim is taking Math 122, Jim is taking Nursing 200, and Jim is taking Physics 101. Okay, like that. All right, and so you'd be able to read off of the row there, Jim's row, what he's taking. Okay, and if I asked you what courses is Mary taking, well, then you would go here and you go, okay, well, Mary's taking these courses, and so on. Okay, but what if I asked you the question, who's taking Physics 101? Well, now it's a little bit harder. Okay, because what you'd have to do is you'd have to actually search all of the possible courses, and you go, okay, well, here's Physics 101, so Jim is taking Physics 101. And then you go through these ones and you go, okay, well, I don't see any Physics 101 there, so I guess Fred's not taking Physics 101. And then you go to here and you go, oh, well, Mary's taking Physics 101. Okay, and actually looks like she's taking it twice. Okay, so that's probably a mistake there, but there it is. And then finally, you take a look down here and you say, okay, and Martha's not taking Physics 101. Okay, so you'd actually have to search through all the possible courses here to see any kind of matches with Physics 101. Now, for a human being, that's kind of annoying. For a computer, it wouldn't be too bad. But still, this is a problem because you have this kind of asymmetry between your lookup. If you've got the name of the student, it's easy to find the courses. But if you've got the course, it's not so easy to find what students are in that course. Okay, but there's an even worse problem. Okay, and this is what's called an anomaly in databases. Okay, and that's what this paragraph is all about here. Okay, so an anomaly is not actually a mistake in the data itself. It's not that I typed in any of the data wrong. An anomaly is a mistake in the way the database itself is designed. Okay, so let me give you an example of an anomaly right now. All right, suppose that Fred were to drop out of Duval College, okay, or they left, okay, and so they're not taking any courses. Well, then you would go up here to Fred and you would say, okay, well, you see this entire row? that entire row, we want to delete that row. We want to delete that row, and the reason we want to delete that row is because Fred has left the college. But you inadvertently wind up deleting another piece of information if you do that. And you say, well, what information? Well, take a look at one of the courses that Fred is taking. Fred is taking CSC 151 right here, okay? And so this tells you that Duval College has a course, CSC 151, and Fred is taking it. But if you delete Fred, you know what you also wind up doing is you wind up deleting CSC 151. Now, if you look through the rest of the table here, you'll notice that no one else is taking CSC 151, okay? And so in deleting Fred, you accidentally also deleted the fact that Duval College has a course called CSC 151. And so it's a problem in the way this database was designed, that by deleting a student, you might accidentally delete information about the courses that are available at that college, okay? And you say, well, that's no good. I mean, I want to keep a record of the fact that Duval College has CSC 151 in it, and if I delete the record Fred, okay, a row is called a record here. So if I delete this record here, I don't want to throw out that CSC 151 isn't taught. Not only CSC 151, but like any other courses here. I think Physics 102. I don't think there's a Physics 102 anywhere else. Is there? There is not. So not only would you, in removing Fred from your list of students, not only would you lose information that Duval College has a course called CSC 151, but you would also lose information about Physics 102, okay? And so this is what's known as an anomaly, okay? And this is a particular kind of anomaly. It's what's known as a deletion anomaly. And a deletion anomaly is where you, by deleting one piece of information, you might accidentally delete some other information that you don't want to delete. And that is known as a deletion anomaly. Okay, let me say it again. By deleting one piece of information that you do want to delete, you might be deleting other information that you don't want to delete. Okay, so we do want to delete that Fred is a student, but we don't want to delete that Physics 102 and CSC 151 are courses at Duval College. And that's what happens if you delete that entire row. You might say, well, what if I just deleted the name Fred and I left the rest of this? Well, then that's kind of weird, because then you just have these like floating courses that are not associated with any student, and you go, what do you do with that? Okay. So this is an example of a database which is not relational. It's just made up of one table. And the problem with one table is that you get these anomalies. And these anomalies are basically situations where there's three different types. The one, which I just showed you right now, is if you delete one piece of information that you want to delete, you wind up deleting other information that you don't want to delete. Okay, and that's your deletion anomaly. But it actually works the other way too. It might turn out that you insert information that you want to insert, but then you wind up inserting other information that you don't want to insert. Okay, and so that's another one. And then the third type is a modification anomaly, where you go to change one piece of information and you wind up messing up other information that's in there. Okay, and so I don't want to go through all the anomalies in detail, because again that's kind of complicated. But I think most people understand the deletion anomaly, and I think you can see right away that deleting row 2 does not just delete Fred from the database, but also deletes Physics 102 and CSC 151. You do want to delete Fred, but you don't want to delete Physics 102 and CSC 151. And how can you do that? Well, again, you could try to think up some magical ways of doing that, but then you leave the database in an even worse state, where you would have like a blank for Fred. So you have like this nameless student that's taking these 4 courses here, like Math 124, Physics 102, CSC 151, and IT 231. I mean, it just doesn't work out very well. Okay, so anomalies are basically situations where you've designed a database wrong, and when you go to delete data that you do want to delete, you wind up deleting data that you don't want to delete. Or when you insert data that you do want to insert, you wind up having to insert data that you don't want to insert. Or you want modify data that you do want to modify, you might wind up having to change some other modification or change some other association that you don't want to make in there. And so for all of these reasons, one single table is not a good idea for a database. Okay, and so like Excel is a table. it's usually a table used for doing calculations, like a calculator, but you could try to use it as a database like this, but it wouldn't work. You would soon discover if you tried to do this that you would run into problems. And the other thing you need to think about with databases is that they're not static things. Like, information is being put into databases and it's being removed all the time. There are new students that are coming to Duval College, and so they need to be put into the database. There are students that are leaving, so they need to be removed from the database. There are new courses that are being put on the books. There are courses that are being taken off the books. And so all of these kinds of insertions and deletions of data have to be accommodated by the database. There has to be some way that the database accommodates those changes without causing these running into these anomalies. Okay. Again, the anomaly doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the data. It's not like I misspelled Fred here. Okay. Or anything like that. The data itself could be perfectly fine. The data has integrity. Okay. It's just the way the database is designed is wrong. Okay. So having said that, you say, well, all right, how then do you design your database? Okay. Now, the entire design of the database is what's called the schema. Okay. So the schema is kind of like the way in which the tables are designed, the way in which the tables are related to one another. That entire design for how the data is organized in the database is called the schema. Okay, so if you say, what do you mean by this word schema? It means the structure of the database and how the data is organized within that database. Okay, it'll become clear as we go along. All right. Now, there are different approaches to designing a database, and again, this is not a databasing course, so I'm not going to teach you a whole bunch of different philosophies, approaches to designing databases. Rather, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you what's known as the entity relational model. Okay, and this entity relational model, it's a kind of approach to designing a database. It says something like this. It says, first identify all of the entities in your organization. Okay, and you say, well, what's an entity? So an entity is anything that your organization works with, any kind of independent thing that your organization works with. So it doesn't have to be a physical thing. It's just like any kind of, like, I don't know, bundle of information. Okay, so like what? Like a student. A student can be an entity. We're going to design a database for a college. So a student. Okay, so you say, all right, a student is one entity, and this entity has attributes associated with them, and the attributes are like, a student has a first name, a student has a last name, and things like that. Okay, so there are things that characterize your student, and your student is one entity. Okay, but then there's other things that your database works with, should work with, and that's professors, because professors are also there in a college. Okay, they're another entity. Okay, and students are physical things, and professors are physical things, but you can have also non-physical entities like a course. Okay, courses are something else that you want your database to follow, to be able to track. And so those are another set of entities. Okay, and then a last set of entities, I did 4 here, but it depends how complicated your organization is. I just made life as easy as possible for us. Okay, so I just said, at this particular college we have only 4 entities. There are students, there are courses, there are professors, and there are majors. Okay, so a course could be associated with several different majors. Okay, something like that. So a major and a course they're not the same thing, obviously. Okay, it takes many courses to to complete your major, and some courses are useful for several different majors. Okay, and so there you go. Those are the entities. Now, at this point in the game, you don't worry about how the entities relate to one another. That's why it's called an entity relational model. You just isolate the entities. So, if you could say, look, can I talk about students independent of anything else? Yes. Like, you could have a student that's on a leave of absence, in which case they're not associated with any courses. They're not associated with any professors. They might not even be matriculated into any major. So, you just got this student, and they're on a leave of absence, and you still want the database to track them. Okay, so they're independent even without any kind of relationship with anything else in any other entity in the college. Okay, now so there's going to be a table for each one of these entities. All right, so just like I had this table up here, all right, but this table was a mess because was this a table associated with students, or was this a table associated with courses? It was actually a mix, which was the problem. Okay, that led to the anomalies. Okay, so each one of the entities that you identify for your organization is going to be given its own table. Okay, so every table corresponds to an entity in your organization. All right. Okay. The next thing is that what do tables look like? They have rows and they have columns. Okay. The rows are going to be the individual entities. Okay, so like row number 1 will be like one particular student. Row number 2 will be a different student. Row number 3 will be a different student. If your college has 100 students, it'll have 100 rows. If your college has 150 students, it'll have 150 rows. Every row corresponds to one particular entity of that particular kind. Okay, so again, courses, maybe your college has 200 courses. Every row is going to correspond to a particular course. Okay, so the rows correspond to the particular entities. The columns correspond to the attributes. And what's an attribute? It's like, well, what characterizes a student? What kind of information do you want to track that characterizes a student? So what characterizes a student at the very least is like their first name and their last name. Okay, maybe what year they're going to graduate. Okay, I think I have that later in my examples. Okay, for a professor, what characterizes a professor? A first name, like my first name, last name, and also maybe my rank. They're like assistant professors, they're associate professors, and they're full professors. All right, and a full is like a senior professor, things like that, something like that. I'm just making up some of these attributes, but the attributes basically they form the columns of your matrix. Of your table. Okay, and the schema. Then let's start off with the professor table here. So professor table might have the following schema. Now this is not the table itself. This is what's known as the schema. In other words, it's the design. How the information is going to be organized for the professor table. You'll see an example of the professor table in a minute. Okay, so each row here is actually an attribute. So the first thing is going to be like an ID number. Like every professor is going to have an ID number. Just like you have a student ID number, I have a professor ID number. Okay. Now, this is the name of the attribute, ID, and what type of data is an ID? It's an integer. Okay. So we already saw that with this idea of data types with spreadsheets. You know that spreadsheets had 4 different types of data types, like there was text and there was numbers and so on. Okay. So here IDs have to be integers. Okay. Actually, they have to be positive integers, but that's okay. We don't have to be perfect here. And then there's like a first name. I'll just call it first. Okay, just first short for first name. And the type of data that a first name is what's called a varchar. Now, that's a silly name, and I'm giving it to you because that's what all databases call it. They call them varchars. But you know what? You could just think of them as text. Okay, like what was called text for spreadsheets, this is just text. Okay, so you say, well, why didn't I call it text here? Because if you go into a database, if you actually do get into the internals of databases, they call them varchars. So I'm going to stick with the name. Okay, and you say, well, what does varchar even mean? It means variable characters. Okay, but you could just think of it as any kind of like string of ASCII characters. That's all it is. All right, so like a first name, like Anthony, my first name. Okay, it's just letters. It's text. It's what in a spreadsheet would be called text. In a database, it's going to be called a varchar. Well, my last name is also a varchar, and my rank is also going to be a varchar. Okay, so this part is the schema. This is just how the data is going to be organized in this table. This table is going to have 4 columns. The first column is going to be an ID. Is going to be the ID, and it's an integer. The second column is going to be my first name, or the first name, sorry, and it's going to be a varchar. The third column is going to be the last name, and the fourth column is going to be the rank. Okay, and you can see that here. So here, the first column is ID, and it's an integer. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And 5, like that. Okay, and they don't have to be in order. I just made them in order here. Okay, so and then the second column, which is the first name, is going to be a varchar. Okay, so there's Anthony, Jim, Mary, Jill, Phil, like that. And then the third column is last, for the last name, and there's a bunch of last names there. Again, they are varchars. And then the rank, and there's a few different type of professor ranks. There's full, assistant, associate. There's another full and an assistant professor, like that. Okay, and So the columns you could see are these attributes, the things that characterize the entities, and each row corresponds to one particular entity. This very first row here is not really a row, it's just the column headers, okay? This is your first row here, okay? And so there's one entity, all right, me, obviously, okay? So my professor ID number is 1 in this database, okay? My first name is Anthony. My last name is Basile. My professorial rank is full, okay? And then that's one entity, okay? Here's a second entity. A second entity is like Jim Jones, okay? Jim Jones has professor ID 2, okay? First name Jim, last name Jones, and assistant professor, and so on, okay? And so there's 5 professors in this college. Okay, so there you go. Now let's move on to the next table. All right, so I'm not doing these in any particular order. Okay, so I did the professors first. Let's do students next. Okay, say what characterizes a student. Okay, what characterizes a student? Well, all students are going to have this ID number. Okay, and it is also an integer. And this ID number is going to turn out to be important. You'll see why in a minute. Okay, so there it is. And just because it's called ID in the student table doesn't mean it's the same as the ID in the professor table here, like that. Okay. Yeah, there are integers in both cases, but this is the ID number for professors, and this one is going to be the ID number for students right there. Okay, and again, this is not the table. What I've highlighted there is not the table. What I've highlighted is the schema. It describes how the information is organized for this particular table. Okay, and it basically says there's going to be 4 columns. The first column is going to be your ID column, and it is an integer. Your second column is again called first for the first name, and it's a varchar. And then last, and it's a varchar. And then the fourth column is going to be year. Okay, and it's an integer. Okay, so there's the schema. Here's the table with some data in it. All right, so you got to watch it because these databases, like I said, they are dynamical, and so data can be inserted, removed, and so on. Okay, so right now this college only has 7 students, but we could add more students, or we could delete a student, like Mike Mueller here, student number 3 here, like that, could drop out, and then you delete that row. Okay, you delete that row, and it wouldn't. Databases are not like they're not like tables. They're not like the tables in a spreadsheet. Like there's no concept of like a blank row or anything like that. Okay, so if you remove that, it would just be like row 1, row 2, followed by row 4, 5, 6, and 7, like that. Okay, so just think of this as like you're inserting rows and removing rows, inserting rows and removing rows. And every time you insert a row, that's like a student enrolling in the college. If you remove a row, that's like a student either graduating or leaving the college or whatever. Okay. And you can see here that according to the schema, it has to have 4 columns: an ID column, which is an integer; first, which is a varchar; last, which is a varchar; year, which is an integer. And you see that here. ID is your first column. Okay. And it is an integer, and you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 there, like that. Okay, I'll say a little bit more about those numbers. They don't have to be in order, but they have to be unique. You'll see why in a bit. Okay, and there's the first names, and they're all varchars, like Martha, Arthur, Mike, Kathy, Lena, and Rick. And I guess I misspelled Stewart here. That's supposed to be Martha Stewart, okay? But Stewart, Dent, Mueller, Smith, Rumsey, Bassett, Sanchez, okay? So there's some last names, and then finally the year. That's kind of maybe like, I don't know, I just made something up, like the year in which you anticipate graduating. And so there's like 2019, 2020, 2018, some stuff like that, okay? And again, that's an integer because a year is an integer. Okay. All right. So that's 2 tables, and the next one we might look at is the course table. Okay. So like what's the course table? So you ask yourself. Remember, we're pretending we're designing this from scratch. You would say to yourself, okay, so what characterizes a course? What characterizes a course? And you'll notice that all my tables have this ID. So everything is going to have like an ID number. Okay, so that's not the course number. That's just like an ID number that characterizes it, and it's an integer. But basically, courses are like a department, okay, and then a number. All right, something like CSC 110. So CSC is the department, and the 110 is the course number. Okay, and so so this schema here says that the table has to have 3 columns. The first column, the ID column, is an integer column. The second column is the department. It's called the department. It's a varchar. And the third column is a number, and it's an integer. Okay. And what I have here is an example of some data that's been inserted there. And again, you have to imagine that data can be inserted, removed. Okay. So up at the top here, again, this is not the row. This is that right there is just the like a header. It's for us to see what's going on. Okay, so there's the 3 columns: ID, department, and number, and then you have your first row is course number 1 is CSC 110, of course. Okay, and then course with ID number 2, that is CSC 120, and then course number 3 is CSC 151, and course number 4 is Math 101, and so on. You can see here I have up to 14 courses in this database. Okay, again, the numbers, these ID numbers have to be unique. Okay, and again, you'll see why in a minute, but they don't have to be in order. Okay, I put them in order because why not? Okay, in fact, when you do put them in the first time, they go in order, but as you keep adding and deleting numbers, they get out of order. Okay, because what will happen is like suppose Jewel College says, you know what, we're not going to teach CSC 151 anymore. Remove it. Okay, well then that one gets removed. Okay, that row there gets removed. But if that row is removed, then you have the numbers 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, like that. And what happened to 3? 3 is gone. Okay, and then as you keep inserting and deleting, you're going to have the numbers getting out of order. But the important thing is that all of the numbers have to be unique. Okay. All right, and then finally, I said that there were also majors at this college. And to describe a major, you only need 2 things. You need the ID number, which is kind of an artificial number that we're giving every entity in all of our tables. Okay, like think about it. You have a student ID number. Where did they get that? They just made it up. Okay, they just said, well, we have to uniquely label you somehow by a number for our database. That's where these ID numbers are coming from. These ID numbers, like your student ID number, was generated out of a database. Okay, and so that student ID number is your ID number in that database. All right, and I have a professor ID number. I don't know how they do the student satisfaction forms anymore, but they used to have a series of numbers associated with them. That's when we used to use the envelopes before we went online with them. But part of that number was my professor ID number. Okay, so there was this course ID number, there was a course ID number, there was a professor ID number, and then a year and stuff like that. Okay, and all those ID numbers were part of the database that kept track of all that. All right, and so here for the major, so we're gonna have another table for majors. You say, well, what characterizes a major? Well, there's the ID number, and then there's just going to be the name of the major. Okay, and so this is the schema. So what I've got highlighted there again, sometimes students get confused. What I'm highlighting right now there is actually just the schema. It's just a description. Okay, I know it looks like a table, but it's not. It just says there's an ID column and it's an integer. There's a name column and it's a varchar. This is the actual table with the data in it. Okay, and I just have 3 majors at this college. But you can imagine, you say, well, but there's a nursing major. Yeah, okay. So if you said, all right, well, we're going to introduce a nursing major, then another row, when you enter the data into your database, another row would appear into this table, and that row is going to be row number 4. We'll give it ID number 4, and it would be like nursing, something like that. Okay, and so, what we have right now is major number 1 is the math major. Major number 2 is the computer science major, and major number 3 is the physics major. All right. So at this point, what you have is 4 tables in your database that correspond to the entities, but they're not related to one another. Like there's nothing in the student table that says anything about what courses they take. And there's nothing in the professor table or the courses table that says what professors teach which course. And so you say, well, the information's not complete. Okay, and that's right. So let's just look at the data again, okay, just to go over it very quickly. All right, so you could see, whoops, I went too far. So you can see here, this is the professor table, and it's just got professor names and their ranks, okay? And then the next one was the student table, and it's just got student names and the year that they anticipate graduating. And then there was a course table, and it's just like the course, the department and the number, like CSC 110, okay? And then you have like just a bunch of majors. And if you ask the question like, well, what professor is teaching CSC 110, where would that go into any of these tables? Okay, it wouldn't go into. There's no place in the courses table, because there's no place that, like, there isn't a column there that says the professor name. And in the professor table, there's nowhere in the professor table that it says what courses they teach. And so there's something missing. And what's missing is the relationships, because what we've done so far is looked at the entities, and now we have to relate all the tables together. Okay, that's why this is called an entity relational model. Okay, the word model, you've seen that like with server client, peer-to-peer model. Whenever you hear model in computer science or in information technology, it just means like a kind of a picture in your head of how you're supposed to do things, okay, or how things are supposed to be organized. And so we've got the entity part done, but now we have to take care of the relationships. We have to relate these tables, okay, and that's where these ID numbers come into place. Okay, you'll see that in a minute. So these ID numbers are very important because they're going to be how I'm going to relate things. But we can't just do that quite yet. I got to tell you about this other thing, and this is probably the hardest part of the whole design, and that's what's called cardinality. Okay, so cardinality is this idea. The cardinality of the relationship is this idea of like how many entities of one kind relate with how many entities of another kind. Okay, so cardinality just means like a count. And so, you say, well, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean, like, how many entities of one kind relate with how many entities of another kind? So let's go through them and I'll give you some examples, okay? So the first type of cardinality that we'll study is what's known as a one-to-many relationship, okay? So we move past the entities, we've got the entities in the tables, now we're trying to relate them. And before we do anything with the numbers or anything like that, we try to identify the cardinality of the relationships between the count of the relationship between the various tables. The first one is a one-to-many relationship. And what does that mean? It means that if you have these two tables, let's call them table A and table B, and you say, all right, I take an entity from table A. How many entities in table B does it relate to? Well, maybe they don't relate at all, and that can happen, okay, in which case you don't have a relationship at all. But if there's a relationship between one table and the other table, you go say, let me take one entity out of table A, so one of the rows in table A, and ask the question, how many entities in table B does it relate to? The answer could be one or many, okay? So let me say that again. I take one entity out of table A, all right, say a professor, out of the professor table, and I say, and the other table is the courses table, and I say, how many courses are relate to one professor? Well, think about that. What do you mean by relate? Well, relate can mean anything. It's kind of abstract. It could mean how many courses does each professor teach? Well, most professors teach more than one course, so one professor out of the professor table relates to or teaches many courses. So one professor teaches many courses. Okay? So there's the many part of it. Now you go the other way. You say to yourself, okay, a course. How many professors teach one particular course? And the answer is, it depends. Like, I know there are team taught courses. In our little toy university here, a course is taught by one and only one professor. Okay? And so the answer would be, for a particular course, there's only one professor associated with it. And this is what's known as a one-to-many relationship. Let me say it again, because it's a little bit of a brainful, okay, when you first think about it, but it's not that bad. You have professors and courses, and you say, for a particular professor, how many courses do they teach? And the answer is many. More than one. It could be one, it could be two, it could be 10. Well, hopefully not 10. That's a lot of courses for a professor to teach. But one professor can teach many. And then you go to the other table and you say, okay, in this table, these are the courses. One course is taught by how many other professors? One. A course is taught by one and only one professor, but a professor may teach many courses. Okay? And this is what's known as a one to many relationship. All right. So an entity from table A may be associated or will be associated with many entities. So one entity from table A can be associated with many entities in table B, but an entity from table B is associated with one and only one entity in table A. Okay, so it's many one way, but it's one the other way. A professor teaches many courses, but a course is taught by only one professor. That is a one-to-many relationship. Okay, so let's not lose track of where we're going here. We have all these tables, and now these are the entities, and now we're trying to relate them. Now, tables might not relate at all, in which case you go, okay, these two tables don't relate. But professors and courses do relate. And you say, well, what is the nature of that relationship? What is the cardinality of that relationship? And the cardinality is a one-to-many. Okay? A course is taught by one professor, but one professor may teach many courses. All right? There's your one-to-many. All right, what about other types of cardinalities? The other type is there are lots of types. I'm only giving you a few, okay? And then not that I expect you to do this in designing. Again, let's try to keep track of this. I just want to show you what goes into designing a database so you have a good understanding of what databases do, okay? So the other type of relationship is a many-to-many relationship. Okay, and you say, well, what's a many-to-many relationship? Well, as you guessed it, you have two tables, table A and table B, and you say one entity in table A can be associated with many entities in table B, and one entity in table B can be associated with many entities in table A. In other words, it's symmetrical. One entity in A relates to many in B, one entity in B relates to many in A. Okay? And an example of that is students and courses. Okay, so there's not only a relationship between professors and courses, but there's also a relationship between students and courses. Okay, one student, okay, so one student here, one row, one student in the student table can relate to many courses in the courses table, okay, because one student can take many courses. Also, one course in the courses table can have many students in the student table. All right, so saying it a little bit more quickly, one student can be associated with many courses, and one course can be associated with many students. One student can be taking many courses at the same time, and one course can have many students in it at the same time. Okay, and that's a many-to-many relationship. All right, so those are the two types of cardinalities that we'll study. There's others. There's a one-to-one, and then there's variations on the one-to-many and the many-to-many. More than enough. You've already kind of got the idea that you're just finding these associations and you're finding the cardinality of these associations. Okay, and what I have in this table here. So this is again it's not a database table. It's just like a part of the schema. It shows there the nature of the relationships. Now, usually in this business, you use 1:n to represent one-to-many, and you use n:(m) to correspond to many-to-many. Okay, and just to be brief, I have here student and course, and you can see the middle term there is nm. So that all I mean by that is that the student to course relationship is a many-to-many relationship. Okay, so one student can take many courses. Going back the other way, one course can have many students in it. Okay, what about majors and courses? Because there's got to be a relationship between majors and courses, right? Because what's a major made up of but courses? Well, a major is made up of many courses. Okay, so one major has many courses in it, but one course can be used for many different majors. Okay, I don't know. I can't think of a good example, but like physics. Physics, ESS, biology, the pharmacy. Okay, so like one course can be part of many different majors, and one major has many different courses in it. So majors and courses are also a many-to-many relationship. What about majors and students? Well, I know that a student can be in several different majors, but we're going to pretend at my tiny college that a student can only be in one major. Okay, so a major can have many students in it, but a student is part of only one major. Okay, so a little bit more about how you read the one-to-many. A major can have many students in it. See how that N kind of is on the student side? So the student is the many side. So one major has many students, okay, in it. but a student can only be in one major. Okay, so you see like how I split it on the colon there. Okay, so the student is in only one major. So the major is the one side of the one-to-many relationship between major and student. Okay, it's not a symmetrical relationship. Like the many-to-many is a symmetrical relationship. It's the same both ways. One from one table maps to or associates with many in the other table, and vice versa. Okay, but the one-to-many is different. Okay, once a student is in one and only one major, but a major can have many students in it. Okay, and then what about professor and courses? And we kind of did this one already. A professor can teach many courses, so the courses is the many side of that relationship. But a course, at least in my college, is taught by one and only one professor. Okay, so that's a one-to-many relationship. All right. And you say, why did we just go through that whole exercise? Okay, why did we go through that entire exercise? Because once you've done this, sorry, I scrolled too fast, but once you've done this, once you've found the cardinality of the relationship between all the pieces, you can start to glue the tables together with the relationships. Okay, so first you have to analyze the cardinality of the relationships, and then you can glue the tables together. Okay, and how do you do that? Well, it's different for the one-to-many and the many-to-many. So let's do the one-to-many first. That one is actually the harder one. And the way it works is, remember those IDs that I had above. Now this is where they come in useful. Those IDs are actually called primary keys. Okay, so that's an important word to learn here, the primary key. You say, well, what is a primary key? So what is this idea of a primary key? Let's go back to one of the tables I had above here. So let's go actually to the student table. Okay, so these are students. So, like Martha Stewart here is one of my students. Martha Stewart has a unique identifier associated with her, and it's the number 1. Okay, number 1 there, like that. So 1 is the ID, or the student ID, for Martha Stewart. Okay, and 3, if I said, who is student number 3? Student ID number 3, it would be Mike Mueller. Okay, or who is student number 5? Who is the student with student ID 5? It would be Kathy Rumsey, like that. Okay, so these unique identifiers, this ID column here, are what are known as primary keys. And the definition of a primary key is it is a unique identifier for every entity in the table. Every entity in the table has to have a unique identifier associated with it. Whatever that unique identifier is called the primary key. In this case, it's the ID column. That's why I called it the ID column. So it's the ID column. It's also known as a primary key. You can't have 2 rows with the same primary key because that would be confusing. Suppose that both Arthur Dent here and Michael Mueller, both Arthur Dent and Michael Mueller, had student ID 3. Okay, so I know Arthur Dent's number there is number 2, but pretend that's a 3. And I said, well, who's student ID number 3? Well, you would know if I were talking about Arthur Dent or Michael Mueller. So if you had a duplication of the primary key between 2 different rows, it would mess everything up. So every single row has to have a unique primary key associated with it, okay? Or unique value for the primary key, okay? And so the primary key, its definition, it is a unique identifier for every single row. There's only one row with ID number 5. And there's only one row with ID number 1. Okay, like that. All right. So these primary keys, they're going to be used. They're going to be used to establish the relationships. All right. And the way you do that is for the one-to-many relationship. The way you do that is you say to yourself, okay, let me go to the one side of the relationship. Okay. And out of the one side, I'm going to take the primary key from the one side of the relationship, and I'm going to move it into another column, into a new column for the many side of the relationship. Okay, and now this is a little bit confusing, so I'll go through it a little bit slowly. Let's do the course professor table. The course professor table up above was just this much here. Okay, just the highlighted part. Never mind that fourth column there, like that. Well, it's a row in the schema, but in the right here. So just ignore this part that I have highlighted right now, where it says Professor ID. Okay, ignore that for a minute. Up above, all I had was this. I had 3 columns for the course table. There was the ID column, there was the department, and then there was the number. Okay. Now, when I'm talking about professors and courses, remember, one professor teaches many courses. So the courses table is the many side of that relationship. Okay, so you go to the table, which is the many side of the relationship, courses, and you add an extra column. Here it is. There's the extra column, like there. Okay, and that extra column is going to be a column which has to match the corresponding primary key from the professor table. Remember, this is the courses table, and so we're going to add an extra column, and this extra column is going to be called the professor ID. Okay, and you say, well, what is this professor ID? The professor ID is actually going to be the ID for the professor that teaches that particular row. That particular course in that particular row. Okay, and so every single course now is not only going to have its own primary key, which identifies that course, but it's going to have a secondary key, which is actually going to be the key that corresponds to the professor that teaches that course. All right, and we'll see this below in a bit, okay? But right now, I just want to make sure that you understand how that one-to-many relationship is being established. So maybe it's worth to go up here, all right? So you see this particular row there, CSC 110. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another column that you don't see in the table right now. Another column. That column is going to be called the professor ID. And you say to yourself, who teaches CSC 110? Well, I do. Okay, so you go up into the professor table, and in the professor table, what's the ID? What's my ID number? It's number 1. And so down over here, besides CSC 110, I'm going to put another integer on the right side, and that integer is going to be number 1, and that number 1 corresponds to me. Okay, and beside every single course, I'm going to put the ID number for the course. I'm going to put the ID number for the professor that teaches that course. Okay? So let me say that one more time. I'm going to expand this table. This is the courses table. This is the many of the one-to-many side of the relationship. I'm going to expand that. And for every single row, at the end, I'm going to put the professor ID number for the professor that teaches that course. And that's going to glue the two tables together. Because then if I ask the question, who teaches CSC 110, you're going to go to the end, not this one here. This one is like its ID number. Okay, that's the primary key for the courses table. You're going to go to the number that's associated with the professor, CSC 110. Suppose it's a different professor. Let's do a different example so it's a different number. Suppose that Jim Jones teaches CSC 110. That would be ID number 2. Okay, so then down here, besides CSC 110, at the very end, I would put ID number 2 because CSC 110 is taught by professor number 2 with ID number 2. And so every course will have the ID number of the professor that teaches it beside it, and that's how you associate which course is being taught by which professor. Okay? And so that's how a one-to-many relationship is put together, by simply expanding the many. Remember, there's a one table and then there's a many table back up here. Okay, so professor and courses. All right, a professor teaches many courses, and a course is taught by one professor. So you go to the many side of this relationship, which is the courses, and in the many side you expand that table. You put an extra column, and in that extra column you put in a key, which is called a secondary key, and that secondary key corresponds to the primary key from the professor table. And that primary key, that secondary key that corresponds to the primary key, puts together the relationship of which professor is teaching which course. Okay, if this is still a little bit confusing, just hang on, it'll get a little bit better. Let me do the many to many. Okay, so for the many to many relationship, the situation is a little bit easier Although I say the situation is more difficult, I'm not so sure. It's more complicated, but easier to conceptualize. What you have to do in the many-to-many situation is you actually have to create another table. Okay, and you say, well, what's this other table look like? Well, the other table is going to be a table which just simply pairs the primary keys from one table and the other table together in this third table. Okay, so you say, well, how does that work? All right, so let's take a look at how students are enrolled in courses. Okay, so if we go back up here to the cardinality associated with students and courses, you'll see that it is many to many. One student can be in many courses, and one course can have many students in it. Okay, so what you do is you create this third table. There it is. There's the scheme of the third table. Okay, and never mind the primary key for that table. It has to have one, but that's not the important part. It's this part that's important, because what this does is it says, out of the student table, get the primary key that corresponds to the student that you want to enroll in a particular course. Say it's student number 3, and go to the courses table and get the primary key that's associated with the course that they're going to get enrolled in. Say it's number 9, and then pair the two together in this third table. And so this table is going to have like a row in it which says 3 and 9. And basically what 3 and 9 says, like that, is it says student number 3, whoever that is going to be enrolled in course number 9. All right? And that creates an enrollment. So we can actually call this the enrollment table. Okay? So student number 3 is enrolled in course number 9. Student number 3 is also enrolled in course number 11. Okay? So you could see that one student number 3, is actually in 2 courses. All right? Student number 3 is in course number 9. Student number 3 is in course number 11. Okay? Student number 7 is in course number 1, and student number 5 is in course number 1. So you can see one course can actually have 2 students in it. Okay? And that's how you can get the many-to-many relationship. Okay? And you say, but I'm kind of confused. Who's student 3 and what's course number 9? Well, you could just cross-reference them in those tables, and you discover that this first row that says student 3 is in course 9, if you dereference the 3 and the 9, basically says that Michael Mueller is in IT 231. So Michael Mueller is taking IT 231. And then number 2 here, student 3 is in course 11. That basically says Michael Mueller is in Physics 102. And then the third row here, student 7 is taking course 1. That's basically Rick Sanchez is in CSC 110. And number 5 here is basically 5 is Kathy Rumsey. So that says that Kathy Rumsey is taking CSC 110. Okay? And so that's how you're making these association with these keys. Now, be very careful about what these keys are. In this number 3, in the student table here, let's go back up to the student table right here. That number 3 there in that table is the primary key for Michael Mueller. Okay, that's the primary key. And remember, the primary key must be unique. It must uniquely identify each of the rows. Okay, so there's no other student number 3. The only student number 3 is Michael Mueller. Okay, that number 3 is a primary key there. But down here in this table, the enrollment table here, this number 3 right there is actually a secondary key. It's the same key, but when its action in the student table is as a primary key, its behavior in this table, the enrollment table, is as a secondary key. Okay? And secondary keys do not have to be unique at all, because they're just basically being used to match things. So you could see here, take a look at that number 3 in the student ID column. That student ID column is basically, it corresponds to the ID in the student table, but it's a secondary key. And you can see that it's a secondary key because it's not unique. There's a 3 there, there's a 3 there, and there's no reason why secondary keys can't be repeated all you like, okay? And this course ID is the same thing. It's basically the secondary key that corresponds to the primary key in the courses table, okay? And it's not unique because you can see here, there's a 1 and there's a 1 there, like that, okay? So in the tables where they're first defined, they're called primary keys, and they must uniquely identify each row, okay? When they're used in another table to make a match, in those other tables, they're called secondary keys, and there's no criterion that they can't be repeated. Okay, and you could see there again, the student ID secondary key is being repeated. 3 is repeated twice, and the course ID is being repeated twice. The 1 there is being repeated twice. Okay, and so there you go. That's how these associations are made. All right. Now, if at this point you're going, wow, that was really painful. There's just so much to try to get my head around. I understand. Okay. Again, I'm not going to give you an assignment that says, no, here's a situation. Go ahead and design the database for it. So what you should understand is that in this entity relational model, basically you have tables which represent the entities, and those entities, they have these primary keys, like your student ID number, your patient ID number if this were a hospital. Okay, so you wonder what are all these ID numbers that are going around? Those are all the primary keys. And those primary keys are being associated with other things in the database. And where they're being associated with the other things in the database, they're being used as secondary keys in those other tables. Okay, and I think this is kind of important because it makes a lot of sense out of why there was all these ID numbers going through your system, whatever your organization is. Like in the medical world, there's authorization IDs, student IDs, not student patient IDs, doctor IDs, and all these kinds of things, and they're all the primary keys, and they have to be unique. Obviously, because if they weren't unique, could you imagine like having 2 doctors with the same ID number? Okay, but then you could say, this doctor is associated with this patient, and maybe on your chart you would see the doctor ID number and the patient ID number. Okay, and that doctor ID number could be repeated in many, many, many different places, because wherever that number is being repeated, wherever that primary key is being repeated, it's being used as a secondary key. It's creating the association. It's creating the relationship. Okay, the part I think you probably find hard is the cardinality, and in the cardinality, you have to determine whether it's a one-to-many or a many-to-many, and that shows where do you put this primary key as a secondary key. Where do you export the primary key as a secondary key? I'll just repeat that very quickly. For a one-to-many situation, basically what you do is you just expand. Like this is for the course. You just basically take the course and you just expand it to include the secondary key that corresponds to the primary key of whatever the professor that teaches that course. Okay, so that's how you do a one-to-many there. For the many-to-many, you actually have to create another table. Okay, and that table just has basically pairs of ID numbers that associate students with courses. Okay, so student 3 here is taking course number 9, and so on. And you can see that any possible pairings are allowed, and so any number of students can be taking any number of courses, and any number of courses can have any number of students in them. Okay, so there you go. That's how the full entity relational model is put together. Okay, and what I have here is basically just an example of majors and courses also being identified, because remember the relationship between majors and courses was also many to many, meaning that like one major can have many courses in it. So like major number 1 can have course 4 in it. Major number 1 can have course 5 in it. Major number 1 can have course 6 in it. Major number 1 has 7, and major number 1 has 8. Okay. Major number 3 has 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11, like that. Okay, so basically, because the relationship between majors and courses was many to many, one major can have many courses in it. One course can service many majors. Because that was many to many, you also had to create this third table, this relational table, which was just a pairing of the secondary keys of which majors have which courses associated with them. Okay. All right. The final schema is at the very end here. Okay, and there's not much to really repeat there. It's just what I had before, but I just wanted to summarize it. All right, now we're not done yet. Okay, we're done designing the schema, and remember the schema is just how the data is going to be organized in our database. Okay, in this entity relational model, there's other things too. I mean, once you've got the database going, it doesn't have any data in it. You have the schema there. Think of the schema as kind of like the scaffolding. Okay, but there's nothing there yet. Well, the next thing is the data entry. Okay, and the person that does the design of the database is not necessarily the person that does the data entry. Okay, databases are very hard to design, and so they usually have an engineer, a database engineer, do that. But the data entry is usually done by some expert that understands how the data is supposed to go in, but is a lower level. It's kind of a secretarial level work. Okay, and those are usually done making use of what are called forms. Okay, and I'm not going to go through the forms, but forms are kind of like a front end to your database. Okay, they're basically the templates that allow you to enter in the data in a formatted fashion. Okay, so forms are used to enter the data into the database. All right, and we're still not done, because now you might have all the data in the database. Okay, but why did you put it there? You put it there in order to ask questions of that data. Okay, and these are called queries. So queries are basically the questions that you would want to ask about the data that's in your database. All right, and the easiest way to do that is to just give you an example. Okay, so for instance, suppose I wanted to ask the question, what professors are teaching in which majors? All right, you say, well, how do I answer that? How do I answer which professors are teaching in which majors? Well, that's kind of deep. In fact, this is kind of a difficult query to start with, because professors don't relate directly to majors. All right. If you take a look above, back at the relationships we had, which was this table right here. Okay, you could see that students relate to courses, and majors relate to courses, and majors relate to students, and professors relate to courses. But there's no place where professors relate directly to majors. And the question was, what professors are teaching in which majors? And you go, geez, how do I do that? Well, what you do is you actually connect the tables together in kind of like a concatenated chain. And you do it this way. You say, look, professors teach courses. Okay. And courses are associated with majors, and so you can go from professors to courses and courses to majors. Okay, or depending on how you want to ask this, you could even do it this way. You can go from professors to courses, courses to students, and from students to majors. Okay, and so what you could see is that you can't answer the question directly. Like, you could ask the question, who are all the professors in at the college? And that's simple. That's just the one table. You could ask the question, what courses are each professor teaching? And then that's going to be two tables, because you're asking questions about what professors are teaching which courses. And then you could say what professors are teaching which students, and then you would go professors to courses, courses to students, because professors, there's no direct relationship between professors and students. The relationship is between professors and courses and students. And so you would have to do something like which professors are teaching which courses and what students are in those courses. Okay, if you want to ask the question, what courses are being taught, or what professors are teaching which students. Okay, and so whenever you have these more complicated questions that are not just about one entity but are about more than one entity, you have to connect the tables together. Okay, and you say, well, how do I connect the tables together? Those are what are called joins. And the joins are precisely what those primary secondary keys are all about. So for instance, if I ask the question, what professors are teaching which majors? Okay, more specifically, I'm really asking what professors are teaching which courses that have which majors that have students in them. All right, then the way that would work is you would connect the professors to the courses, and then you would connect the courses to the students, but you can't connect courses and students directly, because that was a many-to-many relationship. So you actually have to connect them to that relational table in the middle. And so you go professors to courses, through the enrollment table to the students, and then the students are connected to the majors. Okay, once again, you're probably going to say, wow, I would never have been able to think about that. I know. So the queries, the questions that you could ask, are actually, even they are designed by the database administrator. Okay, so I don't expect you to do that. What I do expect you to understand is that in order to answer these questions, you have to work through those relationships with those keys. And so basically, whenever you connect professors in the courses they teach, you say, well, how does that work? Well, you've got the professor's table, you've got the courses table, but you don't want to match every single professor with every single course. That's what's known as a cross join. And a cross join is basically where you take every single row from one table and you match it with every single row from the other table, every possibility, okay, without any matching of the keys, and you get what's called a cross join. Okay, so cross joins are kind of a mess. They do have their uses, but generally that's not what you want. Instead, what you want are what are called inner joins. And what an inner join is basically you join these two tables. Let's just do the professor and the courses table together. But remember, those keys have to match. And so what you do is you require the primary key from the professor table, okay, and we'll call that professor.id, because that's the primary, that ID column was the primary key from the professor table. You make sure that that's equal to the secondary key in the second table, which was the course's professor ID. Okay, so when you make that association, you're saying, no, I don't want every single professor with every single course. Don't match everything with everything. Match only those professors with those courses where the secondary key matches the primary key. In other words, that secondary key matches the professor that's teaching that course. Okay, and that's how you basically join those tables together, so that now you've glued together the professor and the courses through the relationship that exists between the two. Okay, you do the same thing with the courses and the students, but remember, that was a many-to-many relationship, and because it was a many-to-many relationship, you had to have that extra table in the middle. Okay, many-to-many relationships need that third table. That third table was called the enrollment table, and so basically you have to have this intermediate table to glue these two tables together. And the way that works is you go from the courses to the enrollment table, and you make sure that the ID, the primary key that comes out of the courses table, matches its secondary key in the enrollment table. Okay, because that's kind of a dereferencing. That basically says, look, I don't want, for this particular row here, like I'll give you an example. I think an example will make it a lot easier. Okay, so where we had up here that student number 3 was taking course number 9 there. You don't want any old student to be student number 3. You want student number 3 to be row number 3 that corresponded to Michael Mueller. And so you have to make sure that that 3 from the student table matches this 3 from the enrollment table. And that's exactly what this is doing. Okay, it's kind of like Lego blocks. You just have to make sure that the two fit together. Okay, and that glues the courses to the enrollment. But you have to do the same thing on the student side, okay? So you have to make sure that the student ID, which is the primary key from the student table, matches the secondary key from the enrollment table, okay? And that glues those two together. And then finally, the student to major was a one-to-many, because, a student is in one and only one major, okay? And so basically, there's no intermediate table there, and so there you just had the major ID as a secondary key from the student table had to match the major ID as a primary key in the major table. Okay, again, I understand it's a brainful, but I'm just trying to show you how all these things are fitting together. Okay, not expecting you to design them, but to summarize here, the queries are basically how they're the questions that you ask of the database. The way you ask those questions, the way you answer the questions, okay, is by creating these inner joins between the tables. An inner join is basically when two tables are put together, where the rows of one table are matched with the rows of the other table only when the primary and secondary keys match. Okay, and that's called an inner join. If you don't make that match, you get this other thing called a cross join, and that's no good because it just matches every possibility in one table with every possibility in another table, and that doesn't make sense because not every student is taking every course, and not every course has every student in it. Only those courses where the ID numbers match with the student ID numbers are actually taking that course. Okay, and so that's why you have to do these inner joins where the primary and secondary keys are matched. All right. Well, if you understand that so far, just general theory, okay, let me actually show you this database because I put it together already. I'm not going to put it together for you because it takes a long time and I didn't want to waste your time. But if you take a look here, this is basically a LibreOffice base running, okay? And if you take a look at the side here, all right, the side here you have you have tables, you have queries, they're like that, okay? And then you have forms, and then you have reports, okay? So let's go back to the tables for a second. The forms, I already explained what the forms were. They're just ways of putting the data into the database in a structured fashion, okay? I'm not going to go into much more detail than that because I don't think it would be that useful, okay? But if you take a look at the tables, there are the tables that we designed a minute ago. So what tables are there? All right. So the tables that are there are the course table, there's the enrollment table, there's the major table, the professor table, the program table, and the student table. Okay. Now, the enrollment table, just to remind you, you say, well, what was the enrollment table? Well, the original entities were course, major, professor, and student. Okay. But students were enrolled in courses, and the relationship between student and courses was many to many, and so we had to introduce this enrollment table. Okay, so that's where that table came from. And you go, well, what about this program table? Well, remember, there are courses and there were majors. Those were the original entities. But one course can service many majors, and a major can contain many courses. And so the relationship between courses and major was many to many, and so we had to introduce yet another table called the program table. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the courses table. All right? Oh, one sec. Let me switch here. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So this is now the courses table. Okay, so you could see there that this courses table actually has several rows. It's got the ID row there. Okay, and it has the department, and it has the number. So like the first row is CSC 110. But look at that. That is that new column that I added, which was the professor ID column. Okay, and I should just say should mention just one other thing. The numbering of this database started from 0. The numbering of my notes start from 1. Not a big deal, but just if you go to compare the two when when you're looking at the video and you compare, you say, well, wasn't this CSC 110, wasn't that course number 1? Yeah, I know, but the database started from 0, so I started counting from 0, so I just left it like that. Okay, but anyhow, so there's CSC 110. And CSC 110, you can see it has ID 0. There's CSC 110, but it's also taught by professor number 0. And you go, oh, who's professor number 0? Well, if you go into the professors table, I won't do that right now, but if you go into the professors table, you'll actually see that that is me. Okay, and then you can take a look. Okay, what about this other one here, CSC 120? That's taught by professor number 4. And say, well, who's professor number 4? And professor number 4 here is actually the professor for, it's one of the other professors, okay? And so basically the professor column here, okay, that entire professor ID column, those are basically the secondary keys that correspond to the primary keys that index the professors in the professor table, okay? And that's how you associate one course, okay, one course with one professor. CSC 110 has one and only one professor teaching it. But how many courses is Professor 0 teaching? Well, there's a course that Professor 0 teaches, that one. Look at that one. There's another course that Professor number 0 teaches, okay? And here's another course that Professor number 0 teaches, and there's another course that Professor number 0 teaches. So Professor number 0 turns out to be teaching 4 courses, okay? So that's because one professor can teach many courses. But each course is taught by how many professors? One and only one. Okay, CSC 120 is taught by only one professor, professor number 4. Okay, Bio 101 is taught by only one professor, professor number 5. Professor number 5 is teaching 3 courses, I think. Let me see here. Yeah, teaching Nursing 200, Bio 101, and Bio 102. Okay, so look at that fourth column there. See that fourth column has professor number 5, professor number 5, and professor number 5. So one professor can teach many courses, but a course is taught by one and only one professor. Okay, so there you go. There's an example of the one-to-many situation. All right. Now the next thing is actually, let's go back here for a sec, and let me show you the queries. Okay, so over here, what you're seeing is a bunch of queries. All right, now that might be a little small. Let me just expand that a little bit for you. You could see here that on the bottom here, the highlighted in blue, what professors are teaching in which majors. Okay, I wrote that English. I wrote that as English. Okay, and then I have another query here. I have what do I have here? I have what professors are teaching in at our college, okay, and which professor is teaching what course, okay. So like all of these questions are there, and you go, well, how do you turn those questions into a query, okay? And so if we go to this here, so if I were like I'm not going to do this right now, but if I were to like create a new query, okay, then it would bring me to a screen that looks a little bit like this one right here, okay. But at first it would be kind of blank, okay. There would be like a blank here, like there wouldn't be this this like you can see here me moving one of the tables around, okay. That wouldn't be there, okay. And what I did was I basically pulled out the each one of the tables that I needed. So remember, this was the question, what professors are teaching which majors? And the way I decided to answer that question is starting from the left there. You could see that I said, okay, I need the professor table, okay? I need the professor table. Professors are related to courses, so I put the course table next. Courses are related to students, but it's a many-to-many, so there's an intermediate table, and that's the enrollment table. Okay, like that. And then students finally are related to their majors, and I put that table last. Okay, now when I originally did that, there was no line between the tables. Okay, so you could see there that there are these lines. I'm going to remove them for you. I'm going to remove that line. I'm going to remove that line. I'm going to remove that line and that line. Okay, if I perform the query right now, this query would be what's called a cross join. Every single row in the professor table would be matched with every possible row in the course table, which would be matched with every row in the enrollment, which would be matched then with everyone in the student table, which would be matched with everyone in the major table. It would be an absolute mess, okay? An absolute mess. I can't even tell you how many. Like if it's just two tables, if one table has 3 rows and the other table has 4 rows, every row from one table with every row from the other table would basically be like 3 times 4. Okay, that's not what you want. You want only those rows from one table where the primary key from one table matches the secondary key from the other table. And so let me show you how you do that. In the professor's table, that ID that I have highlighted there, that's the primary key. That has to match the secondary key right over there. Okay, so you see that in the professor's table, the ID there, the primary key, has to match the professor ID in the courses table. By the way, if you take a look very carefully, you'll notice that ID here, see the ID on each one of them, like wherever you see ID on each one of them. Basically, that ID has like a little symbol just to the left. That's it's hard to see, but that's actually looks like a little key, and that's because that's the primary key. Okay, so the primary keys are actually denoted in these in the schema here. So now what I want is I want the ID, the primary key from the professor's table, to match the secondary key in the courses table. Okay. All right, so what I did was I basically clicked. Let me do that again just to show you what I did there. So let me remove that. Basically, I clicked on the ID in the professor's table, the primary key there, and matched it to its secondary key in the courses table. And it actually puts a little line there to show that. Okay, and then I matched the course ID, the primary key in the course table, with its secondary key in the enrollment table. Okay, and then I took the student ID here, which is the primary key in the student ID table, and matched it to its secondary key in the enrollment table. And then the major ID there, I matched it with the major ID secondary key in the student table. Okay, and those lines basically show the equality that has to hold between the primary and secondary keys between each table, so that we don't get the cross join, we get that inner join, which are just the corresponding rows. Okay, well, now what? Well, now that you have that, you can actually run the query. Okay, and let me show you how that query is run. All right, so over here I have highlighted the question, what professors are teaching in which major, and let me run that for you. So if I double click that, I get an answer. You can't quite see it yet, but you will in just a second. If I can bring that up. Unfortunately, now I have a lot of tables running. Nope. Okay, and it's up now. So what you see there is actually the response to the query. Okay, and it's not that interesting, but and sometimes you'll get duplicates, but basically you could see there that I teach in computer science. It came out twice because it turns out that there are two students through which I can actually trace myself to computer science, and so that's why it's coming out twice. It turns out that Jill Stein teaches in physics, and I also teach in physics. Okay, so that wasn't the best example, but this window that you're seeing basically popped up when I did when I answered that query. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other queries. All right, so if we switch back to this, you can see that there's some other queries there. Okay, so I highlighted which professor is teaching which course. All right, and let's take a look at the structure of that query first before I actually run it. All right, so let me open that up, and here we go. So this is the structure of the query, and what you could see is this associates the professor with the courses table. Again, I'm asking the question, what courses does each professor teach? Okay, and so that's just a relationship, a direct relationship between professor and courses. Okay, and you don't want every possibility there. You just want the ID, the primary key ID from professors to match the its secondary key in the courses table, and only those ones will actually give the correct result. Okay, only where the primary and secondary keys match will it actually give the correct answer. Okay, so let's actually run that query now. Okay, and okay, and I just ran the query, and you could see there, which professors are teaching which courses. Okay, and so let me just go through them. I am teaching CSC 110. Okay, and you can see that Phil Donnell. Let me just expand this a little bit here, like that. Okay, so Phil Donnell is teaching CSC 120, and I'm teaching CSC 151, and Jim Jones is teaching Math 101, Jim Jones is teaching Math 122, Mary Smith is teaching Math 123, Mary Smith is also teaching Math 124, Jill Stein is teaching Math 125, Jill Stein is teaching IT 231, and I'm teaching Physics 101 and Physics 102. Okay, and so you could see there that basically it answered the query, what professors are teaching which courses, and I didn't get every possible matching of everything. Okay, so you can get every matching of everything. You don't want that, but let me just show you what would happen if I didn't have the proper inner join, if I did a cross join. Okay, so let me just get into the edit the query. Okay, I'm in now where we can design the query, and you could see that I've got this matching going on between the primary key in the professor table and its corresponding secondary key in the courses table. What if I removed that line there? Okay, so you can see that line that connects the two. That line that connects the two basically says that those two have to equal one another. If I remove that, then basically it says match every single row from the professor table with every single row in the courses table. Okay, and I think you can understand that that doesn't make any sense because certain professors are not teaching certain courses, but there's no constraint that says, oh no, the primary keys and secondary keys have to match, and because of that you'll get every possible matching. Okay, so let me run that query for you and show you what it looks like. Okay, so I ran the query, and remember, when there's no matching of primary and secondary key, you get this cross join. Okay, and take a look at who's teaching CSC 110. Okay, I'm teaching CSC 110. Jim Jones is teaching CSC 110. Mary Smith is teaching CSC 110. Jill Stein is teaching CSC 110, and Phil Donnell is also teaching CSC 110. Okay, now who's teaching CSC 120? Well, I am, Jim, Mary, Jill, and Phil. Okay, they're also all teaching CSC 120. And what about CSC 151? Well, me, Jim, Mary, Jill, and Phil. So what's going on? What's going on is because I didn't constrain the query to insist that the primary key had to match that secondary key, it didn't. And it just said, well, I'll allow everything then. And so every single professor is teaching every single course, and every single course has every single professor in it. Okay, this is a cross join, and this is obviously not what you want. Okay, and the inner join comes because you constrain the primary key and the corresponding secondary key to match. Okay, let's go back into the courses table and show you how that matching is occurring. Okay. Okay, so here we are back in the courses table, and remember this column right there? All right, so I'm being a little bit repetitive, but I want to make sure that we understand this. That's the professor ID. So who's teaching CSC 110? Only professor number 0. Okay, who's teaching CSC? That's this one right here. So who's teaching CSC 110? Look at the last column, only professor 0. Who's teaching CSC 120? Only professor number 4. If we did not insist that the professor ID, which is a secondary key in this table, match the professor ID, which is the primary key in the professor table, we would not be restricting those courses to just the professors that are teaching them. Okay, and so when you do the restriction, you get the right answer. That's known as the inner join. When you don't restrict primary and secondary keys so that they have to equal one another, you've got a cross join, and a cross join is not what you want. Okay, so that's the theory behind databases. I want to just show you one last thing, and then we're done. Okay, I want to show you. I promised right at the beginning of when we started talking about word processors, that word processors can pull in data from your databases, so that you only have to write that template letter once, and it'll pull in all the data from the database for you. Let me demonstrate this for you. It's called a mail merge. Okay, so let me switch to LibreOffice Writer. Okay, and then I'll show you how that mail merge works. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is a LibreOffice Writer page. This is like your Microsoft Word, and all I've done is I've just typed the word dear. Now what I want to do is I want to send a letter to every professor. So I want to send a letter, to a first name, last name for each professor. I don't want to have to type that for all 5 professors. So what I do is in the letter here, under View, there's a place where it says Data Sources. Okay, and I click Data Sources, and what you see is what popped up is this window up there. And let me try to make it a little bit bigger for you so you could see it a little bit better. Okay, you could see that there's up here, there's like where it says bibliography. That's one database, and then there's another place where it says new database, and then there's where it says CSC 110 lecture. And I didn't show you when I actually created the database, but when I first created the database, I actually called it CSC 110 lecture. Okay, so under View, so in the menu item up here, okay, you can't see me open it up because, again, the limitation of the software. But under View, there's a place where it says View Data Sources. Okay, and under the View Data Sources, it basically brings up this window here. And I'm going to look at the CSC 110 lectures, and I'm going to open them up. And what you can see when you open it up is it shows you the queries. Okay, now it's a little bit small there, but I think you can see that it says queries. Okay, so here we go, queries. And now, there's like what professors are teaching, what courses, what professors are teaching at our college, and what professors teaching which course, and so on. And that was that cross join, so you could see it's a mess there. But I just want to pick this one right here. And if I expand it, you can see that what it says there is what professors are teaching at this college. Okay. Now, I didn't show you how I constructed that query, but it was absolutely trivial. It's just the one table because the professors are all in one table. And you can see here that there's, it shows the first name, last name for the result of the query. Okay. Now, what you can do is you can go to where it says first name right up here at the top. Right there, I've got it highlighted. Okay. And you could just grab that first and drag it into your letter. All right. So I'm just going to grab first, and I'm going to put it right beside dear here like that. Okay. And then I'm going to put a space, and then I'm going to go to last, and I'm just going to grab last. I'm grabbing like the whole column and just dragging it over there like that. And then it says last. Okay. And let me just shrink this down so you could see what my letter looks like right now. And so what you could see there is it says dear, first, and last. But notice that first and last, they're kind of highlighted in gray. Do you remember when we inserted page numbers in the footers of pages? They came up as these fields. Those are fields. Okay. And guess what's going to fill those fields? Well, what's going to fill the fields is basically the first and last name of each of the professors at my college. So I don't have to type this letter like a dozen times or 5 times, one for each professor. All I have to do is type it once, and I don't know what I can say next. I mean, like comma, and I can go, how do you like teaching at DYC, question mark. The administration. Okay, so I don't know, I just came up with some letter, and basically what I'm going to do next is I'm going to print it. Okay, and you can't see me print it, but I'm going to print it, and when it prints, what it's going to wind up doing is it's going to wind up actually producing all of the different fields. Okay, and right now it's saying to me, do you want to your document contains address database fields, do you want to print a form letter? I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to say okay at this point, and it actually says it's printing 5 letters. I'm going to print it, and I know you can't see it, but I'm going to save it right now. And oh, it wants to save it as a PDF. I guess I can save it as a PDF. All right, save. I don't know why it's saving it as a PDF, but it is. All right, and let me open it up for you. Okay, I actually had to do it twice. I accidentally saved it as a PDF. I just resaved it as an ODT. But you could see there, Dear Anthony Basile, how do you like teaching at DYC, the administration? And if I scroll down, okay, the next page says, you can actually see there in blue the page break. So every document has a page break between them. Okay, and scroll down, and now this one says, Dear Jim Jones, okay, how do you like teaching at DYC, the administration? And the next one says, Dear Mary Smith, and Dear Jill Stein, and then finally, Dear Phil Donnell, and or Donnell, and those were all the professors that were in the database. So, back to this like order one operation, like how many times did I write this letter? Well, I wrote it only once, okay, and I put the fields in there, and I had 5 professors, so it did it 5 times for me automatically. What if I had 500 professors? Would it have been any extra work? Not really. It would have been exactly the same amount of work, okay? Because you only have to type the letter once. You drag in the fields wherever you want the particular names to be, the first and last name, and it will automatically, when you go to print it, it'll automatically print 1 letter for each of the rows in the database that's coming out of the queries. Okay, and so there you go. You could see that actually what you have here is just an excellent a scalability. Okay, where you're scaling. Let me do that. Try that again. There we go. Where things are scaling like order one. It's order one scaling. So back to the very beginning, right? Where I talked about scalability. What was scalability? It's like basically how much extra work does it take as the number of data items increases? Well, if it's order n, that meant that, you double the number of items, it's twice as much work. Well, that wasn't the case, okay? Order n squared is even worse. Double the number of items, it's 4 times as much work, okay? Secretarial work or whatever. And no, this was order 1, okay? It's just as much work if I have 1 professor at my college, 5 professors, 10 professors, 100 professors, 1,000 professors. It wouldn't matter. I would just have to type the letter once, press print, and it automatically does all 1,000 for me off of the template. Okay, so there you go. There's our story with databases, and that's the end of our lecture. All right, bye-bye, everyone.